The year was 1947. The air in Calcutta, usually thick with the mingled scents of spices, dust, and human endeavor, now carried a sharper, more volatile tang, a cocktail of fear and feverish, fragile hope. The city, and indeed the vast subcontinent, stood on the precipice of a pivotal historical moment: partition. The British Raj was dissolving, but the freedom promised was being cleaved into two hostile halves: India and Pakistan. This division was the monumental, terrifying backdrop against which lives would be broken and remade. Our central character was Anya Sharma. At 23, Anya possessed the keen, watchful eyes of a scholar, yet she carried the deep exhaustion of a woman who had witnessed too much political turmoil for her young age. She had grown up in Lahore, a city now marked for the new state of Pakistan, but she was a Hindu who had always believed in a united, syncretic nation, a tapestry of religions and cultures woven together over centuries. Her father, a revered barrister, had preached this unity until his death a year prior, leaving Anya with a burdensome, almost sacred legacy, a cache of his unpublished, fiercely nationalist essays advocating for a single, secular India. She sat in a cramped, rented room in an overcrowded Bengali neighborhood, the frantic energy of the streets seeping under the door. Outside, the clamor of Vande Mataram blended discordantly with the cries of Allahu Akbar, a sound that was less a chorus and more a growing threat. Her most prized possession, a worn leather briefcase containing her father's manuscripts, lay on her lap. It was her ticket to a new life, her duty, and perhaps her doom. Anya's companion and counterpoint was Farid Khan. Farid, a Muslim craftsman in his mid-20s, was not driven by political ideology, but by a fierce, practical loyalty. He was her father's former apprentice, a master weaver whose hands could coax silks into poetry. When the riots had erupted in Lahore, Farid, risking his own community's wrath, had smuggled Anya onto a train bound for the east. He was the silent, steady anchor against the rising tide of madness, a living embodiment of the lost possibility of Hindu-Muslim cooperation. "We must find a way to publish these, Anya," Farid said, his voice low, polishing a brass lamp with deliberate rhythmic strokes. "Your father's words, they must be heard before the ink dries on this terrible agreement." He spoke not of the political agreement, but of the unspoken, bloody pact of separation forming in the hearts of men. Anya looked at the briefcase, its lock glinting under the meager lamplight. The manuscripts promised a world that was no longer going to exist, a world where their shared history outweighed their religious differences. It was the fading promise. The freedom they had yearned for was here, yet it tasted like ash. They had escaped one fate, but the journey to secure her father's legacy, their final act of rebellion against the division, was just beginning, and the road ahead was shadowed by a future they couldn't yet comprehend. The village of Oakhaven had known peace for 3 centuries. Nestled between the whispering elderwood and the gentle Asia River, its existence was a testament to tranquility. The villagers, mostly weavers and farmers, knew nothing of conflict beyond the occasional squabble over a boundary stone. Ilara, the village elder, carried the collective memory of this calm, her face a roadmap of peaceful years. The existing order was simple: seasons changed, crops grew, and life continued, undisturbed. The shattering event arrived, not with a bang, but with a sound more insidious, a low, persistent hum that vibrated not in the air, but in the very bedrock beneath Oakhaven. It was the height of the summer harvest. The fields were golden, and the air was thick with the scent of sun-warmed grain. Ilara was supervising the younger workers when the hum began. It was a subtle thing at first, easily misunderstood for a faraway storm. But the oxen grew restive, the dogs whined, and the oldest oak in the center of the village shed its leaves in a sudden silent downpour. The hum intensified over the next few hours, morphing into a sound that felt less like noise and more like a physical pressure, a constant, dull ache in the chest. It drove sleep away and gnawed at the edges of reason. The children cried, asking their parents what the earth was saying. Then came the physical evidence. A scout, young Cale, returned from the western hills, his face ash gray. He didn't need to speak. He simply pointed to a black line on the horizon, a smear of unnatural soot against the clear sky, moving slowly but inexorably closer. "It is the Iron Legion," Cale whispered, his voice cracking. "They're war machines. The whisper, that's what they call the noise. It disables the will to fight. They are not conquering, they are simply arriving." The Iron Legion was a tale of terror from history books, a civilization long thought extinct, whose entire philosophy was built on absolute, unthinking efficiency and resource extraction. They destroyed order to build their own sterile, metallic one. The moment of shattered peace was not the hum, nor Cale's report. It was the instant Ilara realized she could feel the hum resonating with her own heart, urging her to submit. The existing peace was broken because the choice was no longer abstract. It was imminent. She gathered the villagers in the square, the omnipresent hum pressing down on them. "We have two choices." Her voice was firm, cutting through the low roar. "We can gather our food and try to run. The forest is deep, but the machines are relentless. Or," she paused, looking at the generations of peace etched into their faces, "we can stand. We can use what we have, the river's bend, the forest's cover, the ancient knowledge of the land, and refuse to surrender the soil that has fed us for 300 years." The simple order of their lives was violently replaced by the terrifying complexity of war. The harvest, the weaving, the quiet nights all vanished. The choice was forced upon them: fight and risk annihilation, or flee and accept oblivion. The whisper of war had become a deafening roar, and in the silence between her words, Oakhaven was no longer a village of peace. It was a line drawn in the dust.
The air in the library hung thick and dusty, the scent of aged paper, a poor mask for the fear that now permeated the city. Elias traced the spine of a leather-bound book, the last connection to a life he was about to forfeit. Outside, the sirens wailed their nightly curfew, a chilling reminder of the Protectorate's absolute rule. For 6 years, he had been a ghost, a mild-mannered archivist by day, his true identity buried under stacks of cataloged history. But his past, his conviction, was now demanding a price. Elias was the last known descendant of the original Free Speakers, the banned intellectual movement whose forgotten manifestos lay hidden beneath his floorboards. The Protectorate's purge had begun with rumors, then escalated to public arrests, and now it was at his doorstep. Earlier that day, a nervous young courier, no older than 16, had slipped a compressed data chip into his hand. It contained the final coordinates for the underground resistance, the ignition cell, and a message: "The window closes at midnight. If the Free Speakers are to live, the archive must die." The archive, 2,000 years of recorded history, painstakingly preserved by Elias and generations before him. It was a cultural memory, the knowledge that fueled his very being. The Protectorate was not burning books. They were seizing them, weaponizing the past, twisting narratives to legitimize their iron grip. If he left the archive intact, its contents would be used to forge a history where dissent never existed and freedom was a myth. He looked at the small, cylindrical incendiary device on the desk. Its timer was set to the stroke of midnight. He could leave. He could walk out the door, take the courier's escape route, and disappear into the sewers to join the ignition cell.
They needed his knowledge, his understanding of the city's hidden infrastructure. He would survive, a lone scholar, and help fight another day. But the thought of the priceless scrolls, the original philosophical debates, the unedited chronicles, all consumed by fire, made his hands tremble. He was a caretaker, not a destroyer. His lineage was of preservation, not conflagration. The clock on the wall ticked past 11:30 p.m. He sank into his chair, the weight of 2 millennia pressing down on him. If he sacrificed the archive, he committed himself fully to the violence and uncertainty of revolution. His quiet, scholarly life would be over. There would be no return. He would trade the certainty of intellectual light for the brutal, necessary shadow of war. This choice was not just about fire. It was about shattering the neutrality he had so desperately maintained. Preserve the past and lose the future? Or burn the past to save the truth? Elias stood up, his gaze hardened by a sudden, fierce resolve. He picked up the incendiary device. The Protectorate did not fear the books themselves. They feared the minds that read them, the ideas they contained. And ideas, he realized, were not housed in paper, but in people. He could rewrite history, but he could not reignite a crushed spirit. With a deep breath, he disabled the main fire suppression system. His hand, steady now, placed the device deep inside a volatile shelf of newly cataloged propaganda, the Protectorate's own fabricated history. It was a choice that burned his soul more than any flame could touch the paper. He turned and walked toward the emergency exit, leaving his past and his life's work behind. As the last seconds bled away, he heard the faint hiss of activation. Elias stepped out into the night, officially a terrorist, his heart already committed to the central, bloody conflict of the resistance. The crucible had melted his old self away.
Elias lived in the Gray City, a place built on the principle of predictable logic. Its citizens valued routine, and the single, colossal structure that housed them all, the Citadel, was their universe. For Elias, a cartographer whose job was to meticulously chart the city's unchanging floor plans, the monotony was suffocating. He craved the unknown, a foolish desire in the eyes of his peers. The physical divide was the sheer, seamless wall marking the Citadel's western boundary, the veil of unreason. No one had ever been beyond it. One evening, while cross-referencing ancient, supposedly fictional maps, Elias found a hidden seam. Driven by a blend of curiosity and despair, he used a specialized etching tool to widen the crack. The wall didn't crumble. It shimmered, then peeled back like an iris opening. The new setting was immediate and shocking, the ochre expanse. It was a vast, sun-baked desert of shifting red dunes, smelling of spice and ozone. The sky was an impossible, swirling amethyst. Elias had crossed the first divide. He hadn't walked for more than an hour when he met the first secondary character, Kale. Kale wasn't human, but a creature of sinuous shadow and woven wire covered in dust motes. He was a scrapper, a scavenger of the ruins scattered across the expanse. "You look lost, Citadel dweller," Kale rasped, his voice like grinding sand. "No one crosses the veil unless they seek what they've thrown away." Kale, despite his terrifying appearance, proved crucial. He possessed the knowledge of the wasteland and the ruins that dotted it, relics of a civilization destroyed by the very logic the Citadel now worshipped. Kale didn't just guide Elias physically, he challenged the metaphorical divide in Elias's mind, the ingrained belief that the Citadel's order was the only path to safety. Their journey led them to the ruins of an orbital communication hub, a setting called the Spires of the Silent Echo. Here, they encountered the second crucial character, Dr. Lyra. Lyra was a historian, a lone woman attempting to decipher the final warning broadcasts of the previous world. She was the counterpoint to Elias's cartography. She didn't map the present, she charted the past. Lyra's research revealed the terrifying truth. The Veil of Unreason wasn't a boundary, but a quarantine wall. The Citadel hadn't invented logic, they had enslaved it, fearing the chaos of true innovation. The unreason wasn't madness, it was potential. The greatest divide, Lyra told Elias, pointing to a shimmering dust cloud that was the Citadel in the distance, was not the wall you crossed, but the one you still carry inside you, the fear of being wrong. This revelation was the turning point. Elias realized his journey was not just to see the world, but to reconcile the two halves of himself, the cartographer, who valued order, and the adventurer who embraced the unknown. The physical journey was nearly complete, but the metaphorical journey, the decision to carry the truth back across the divide, was the one that would determine the plot's future. He had to become a different kind of cartographer, one who mapped not the floors of a prison, but the endless possibilities outside.